In Connecticut, we have trouble bragging about things that we did 100 years ago, right? Henry Ford came to Connecticut to look at tool manufacturing in Hartford to get ideas on how to build an assembly line in Detroit. That's our legacy. Innovation is our birthright. Manufacturing is our birthright. Let's embrace it.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. And today is a very special episode as it represents the beginning of our 5th year. It has been so exciting over the last 4 years, talking to manufacturers of all sizes and stripes. And today we have a very special guest, the new leader of AdvanceCT, John Bourdeaux. John, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
John, it's really a pleasure to have you on to kick off our 5th year. I'm really excited to take this kind of new direction, talking about sort of the tip of the spear, not just of growing the manufacturers that are here in Connecticut, but finding new manufacturers all over the country and all over the world who are going to make Connecticut their home. So I'm really excited to talk about all that. But the Made in America podcast, whether it's the 1st year or the 5th year, starts off with the same 2 questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And second of all, what do we make at AdvanceCT? We make momentum. Why do we make it? Connecticut needs it. And Connecticut has an incredible, as you've proven over the course of the last 4 years, an incredible manufacturing ecosystem. And being able to capitalize on the momentum of all the things that we've accomplished historically and all the things that are being created here in the state right now and the really, really bright future, and telling that story to the rest of the country, to the rest of the world, and also to ourselves is what AdvanceCT does. And we're excited to bring that momentum to the state and to bring it and make people feel really enthusiastic about where they live and work.
Listen, I really appreciate that, John. And I as I think about sort of Connecticut, of course, it's the Made in America podcast. And as I think about what Connecticut does and what you're doing, what you're going to share, I really think of it as like a microcosm of even what the United States needs to do when we think about us versus the rest of the world, really talking about workforce and technology and what we're doing to advance and the things we need to make to be competitive and exciting to the world and make great stuff. And I think it's a great story. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about it. I think you have an interesting background. And, I think that stories are really best told when we can connect with the people that are part of those stories.
Sure.
So before we really get into talking about, the details of what you do and how you do it and the thoughts you have about sort of being the sales engine for the state and kind of the really special way you think about sort of business development and creating a funnel, and we'll get into the stats and the stories and all that. I think we should really start off to really understand how like a theater person ultimately became the CEO of AdvanceCT. So maybe start with kind of your journey.
So my journey, as you noted, my first stop was as a theater producer. And the origin story there is I started doing improv in Chicago when I was in college and did it for years afterwards. And so improvisation is, most people think about it as being funny, which is great, and it's a lot of fun. But actually, it's one of the best preparations that I know for leading a team. And just a real quick plug on improvisation. Improvisation is about listening. It's about adding ideas, and it's about making your teammates look good. And those are 3 things that I think that every room needs more of. And so I did that for a while.
Before I'm going to let you get off that, but I just want to, can you elaborate on that? So you're saying improv is great for leading a team because it involves listening and involves promoting and making other people look good. Just give me a quick kind of elaboration on that.
Yeah, sure. So if you're, there's a phenomenal small improv theater in Hartford called CT Improv, which I love going to, and they're really, really great. And if you go to that room and you sit down and you watch a couple people get up on stage and they take a suggestion from the audience that they've never heard of before, those 2 people have to start working together immediately in order to entertain the ticket buyer. It's not something that is simple or easy, but they have to be in sync. And how do you get in sync? Well, you got to listen very, very carefully to what's going on. And because everything's made up, you have to listen, take the idea, and then add something new to it to make it richer and richer. And one of the ideas, one of the precepts of improv is make your teammates look good. because if they look good, that person's going to have confidence, and they're going to keep on adding really interesting things to the story. And when I'm in a room, when I'm in a meeting, when I'm trying to work with a team and think about where are we going, strategic thinking, generative thinking, those are some good rules, I think.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's a really interesting way to think about improv. So we're in Chicago, we're doing some improv. Where do we go from there?
Philanthropy, believe it or not. So it turns out that I have a little skill set that I didn't know about, which is I'm not afraid to ask someone for something at all. And so I actually got into philanthropy. I worked for nonprofits. I worked for universities. I worked for theaters. I worked for schools. And my job was to go and to sit down with people and learn what motivated them, and to ask them for as much money as I possibly could to support the mission of an organization. And really, really enjoyed that. And my last stop here in Connecticut was at the Connecticut Science Center, working with Matt Fleury, who's one of our great regional leaders. And so I was working there for about 6 years before I made the switch over to AdvanceCT.
Do you think that there's a connection? I was just having a conversation actually in my other life about sort of thinking about sort of like sales and storytelling, and thinking about, and maybe there's a connection back to your improv, but thinking about there's a big difference between selling a tangible item and sort of selling an idea.
Yeah.
And I think about what you're doing today and what you were doing, whether it's a school or any other type of nonprofit, you're really selling an idea, right? People don't give to a theater or to a school necessarily because they're going to get something back. Maybe you get your name on something, but that's not why you're doing it.
Right.
You're doing it, I think, and you'd confirm, because you believe in the mission, you believe in the outcome that's going to be provided. And there is no guarantee that when you write that check, that outcome will definitely happen, or in what time frame it would happen. You go to buy a suit, you're going to give money, you're going to walk out with that suit. Right. You can make a decision, is that suit worth what I'm going to pay for? And I will have it. That transaction's easy. But in philanthropy, and maybe much like what you're doing in AdvanceCT, you sell sort of an idea that someone's got to buy into. Am I onto something there?
You're absolutely onto something. It is, in fact, it's the through line, really, which is, when people ask me, doing philanthropy and doing economic development, those are as far apart as you can imagine. I was like, well, actually, what we do is we talk to people about something that they hadn't necessarily thought of, help build that idea in their mind as something that they really, really, really want to do, make a commitment that they perhaps never thought that they could or would make, and then feel great about it afterwards. Did I just ask you for $20 million, or did I just ask you to plant your company in Connecticut?
Right.
Same, absolutely the same. And it's, it is an interesting through line, but I think, the idea of supporting a mission, or supporting an intangible, or understanding how your impact as a philanthropist or as a business leader might lend itself to enhancing an ecosystem, to making a place more special. These are all good things. And when you're a philanthropist, you do get something out of it. It may be your name on a building, okay. But a lot of people feel great about it. Right. If you plan a business here in Connecticut, we want you to feel great about it. And we want to put the things in place that are going to make you feel great about it. And that's part of what we do at AdvanceCT.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's kind of move on to the AdvanceCT story a little bit. So you got recruited, made the decision to transition from, a long history of successful philanthropy and fundraising into AdvanceCT. Why?
Well, during the pandemic, it's one of those things this is a great Connecticut story as far as I'm concerned. During the pandemic, I thought Connecticut was doing a great job. I really did, and was really impressed with the governor's leadership and with the people he was attracting to come and work with him to lead the response to something that no one ever thought they would be responding to, or if they did, it was only in a theoretical way, right? Being actionable around a pandemic is not something that you spend a lot of time, planning for. And so I thought, I was talking to my spouse, as all good husbands would do, talking to my spouse about, I've been at the Science Center for 6 years, really enjoying the work there, but I wonder if there's something more I can do for Connecticut. This is our adopted home. I'm not from Connecticut. My wife's not from Connecticut, but we chose Connecticut. We chose to raise our kids here. And it was a fantastic choice. Really, really, the ROI on that has been pretty impressive as far as we're concerned. And so I have a neighbor. His name's Matt Ritter. He's the Speaker of the House. And I know when he walks his dog. And so he has to walk his dog past our house on the way to Elizabeth Park in the west end of Hartford, and basically flagged him down one day, from a distance, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about what can I do for Connecticut?" And he's like, "Well, there are a couple things you can do." He said, "You can run for office." And I was like, "Well, I got the hair for it, but not the stomach." He's like, "You could be a lobbyist." I'm like, "I'm not so sure about that." And he said, "Well, there's this third thing of folks where we just need people with good management skills and leadership skills who care deeply about Connecticut, but understand that they're not going to get a lot of credit. The pay is not great, and you're going to take the blame for anything that goes wrong." I say, "Oh, that's it. Perfect. Thank you."
Sounds like what I've been doing my whole career.
Total win. And Matt put me in touch with Josh Jabal, who was at the time the chief operating officer of the state. And Josh put me in touch with a number of people, including Peter Denius, who has been our CEO up until recently and is going to be stepping down on October 1st. And I'll be taking on that role, and excited about that, and excited about what we've been able to build together. But that's how I came to AdvanceCT, and it was a great choice, and haven't looked back.
So, I realized that we didn't necessarily even explain what AdvanceCT was.
Yeah, well,
and I think we should do that. First of all, AdvanceCT is a newish name for something that had a name before. So just maybe walk through that for people that may recognize the.
Yeah. So AdvanceCT is what I would say is a reboot of the Connecticut Economic Resource Center, or CERC, which is an organization that did economic development work with utilities and things like that from 1993 up until about 4 years ago. When Governor Lamont came into office,
CERC, not a very exciting name.
Yeah, there's a thing in Connecticut where we say things to each other, including things like CT, and people outside of Connecticut don't know what that means. So just a little pro tip: if you're talking to someone outside of Connecticut and you say CT, you may be talking about ocean and sort of a drink that's very popular in England as far as they're concerned. So AdvanceCT was a brainchild of Governor Lamont, at the time Commissioner David Lehman, who was the former commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, our commerce lead. Basically said, look, what's the best practice for economic development, throughout the country? And they went and looked. And the answer is a public-private partnership, where the public part, the commerce function, handles things like incentives and regulations and things like that, and helping to cut red tape. And the private organization moves at the speed of business. Government's not great at moving at the speed of business. In fact, maybe we don't want government moving at the speed of business. Government should move at the speed of government. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes when you need to interact with a company, you need to move, at a speed that they may find a little bit more comfortable. And the other piece is that you need a sales and marketing arm, and really business development work. And that's what AdvanceCT does. We work in 4 lanes. We have a business attraction unit that attracts companies from outside of the state, a business retention and expansion unit, which helps companies here expand, a marketing group, which we're very, very focused in our marketing around trade shows and lead generation, which I'm happy to talk about. And we have our secret weapon is our research group that comes up with just phenomenal ways for us to talk about the way that Connecticut's assets can impact a company, whether it's here already or thinking about coming into the market. We're about 22 people. We're small but mighty, just like Connecticut.
Yeah, listen, I definitely connect to that nimble kind of concept there. And I think, people talk about the speed of government, and, listen, you look at any organization as it gets bigger, it just tends to move slower. Yeah. And the ability to sort of have a nimble footing, I think, is inherent in having something smaller to manage. So it's interesting to sort of look at a state of whatever, 3.5, 4 million people that really has 22 people that are out there sort of as the tip of the spear to do business development.
Yeah. And it's not a criticism of government at all. Government, it's government. It's large. It requires a lot of oversight. It requires a lot of transparency. And in fact, personal opinion time, I like my government moving slow enough that I can see what it's up to.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. And so let's talk about what you guys do. So how much time do you think about business retention versus business growth? And I think we had a nice conversation kind of prior to recording, just talking about, when any business looks at growing revenue, there's always 2 components, right? There's going to be retaining and growing your existing customer base.
Right.
Then there's going to be bringing in new customers.
Right, exactly. And as you know very well from your own personal experience, your next best customer is your current customer. And that's true in economic development as well. We want people in Connecticut to expand here, and we want to talk to the companies that are here about what the opportunities are, and to be helpful in doing that. And so that's probably about 60% of our focus, versus about 40% around business attraction and our outwardly facing work. The outwardly facing work around business attraction gets a lot of headlines. People love the press releases and the announcements and the ribbon cuttings and all that sort of stuff. But when you're thinking about economic growth writ large, we're talking about macroeconomics here. And so when we're talking about growing the economy of Connecticut, focusing on who's here already and how to make them more successful is a really good strategic move.
So when you think about sort of that 60-40 split, sort of at a high level, listen, you're not the government, you're not everything, 22 people, we've already said. So what do you think about what falls into that 60% bucket? What are you doing from that standpoint?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different programs that we have in place. So we reach out to employers all the time. Proactively are reaching out and talking to folks. Sometimes it's because we read something in the newspaper. Sometimes a member of our board says, "Oh, you should call so-and-so. They just raised some money," or "You should call so-and-so because they just didn't raise some money." It's someone who picks up the phone and calls us, calls the state, and says, "We're thinking about expanding. What does that look like?" Or we're having some trouble. Is there help out there? We're the front line for that. We're the ones that answer the phone. And so when we think about it, we're talking to the top employers in the state. We're talking to folks that reach out to us and just engaging in a conversation, understanding what the challenges are and seeing what we can do to ameliorate them.
So there's, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of businesses. I have no idea.
Yeah.
So, there's got to be a limit to what 22 people can do.
Yes. Yeah. And so, we start with our largest employers, right? Largest employers can have the largest upside and the largest downside.
Right.
And so that's where we start. We also organize ourselves around sort of key verticals. And those are advanced manufacturing, of course. They are life sciences, technology, insurance, financial services, and renewable energy. And so we do focus on those areas, not to the exclusion of anybody else, but in terms of being proactive and in terms of recruitment, that's where we're focused. Connecticut, as you just said, AdvanceCT can't be all things to all people. Connecticut can't be all things to all people. We are 3.5 million people. There are only so many things that we can do and be successful at. And so one of the things that we do is make sure that we're focused in areas where we can provide maximum value to employers and to companies that are coming in to provide that value that maybe another state can't quite get there. Or maybe we can do it a little bit differently, or maybe we can provide them a little bit more access and a little bit more connectivity, which helps de-risk their business. Because the one thing we've learned in the last 5 years is that risk equation, it's gotten a lot more complicated. I'm not really strong in multivariable calculus. I assume that you are, but my CEOs that used to deal with 3, 4, 5, 6 variables are now dealing with sometimes an order of magnitude larger, and solving that kind of math is really hard. So if we can de-risk a choice, if Connecticut can be part of an asset in Connecticut, whether that's our workforce, our university system, whether it is access to governmental institutions, whether it's a customer base, if we can help de-risk that choice, we help eliminate some of those variables, and that's one of the ways that Connecticut ends up winning.
So let's pivot to the 40% conversation. So talk about kind of your mindset and how you think about approaching that sort of net new business growth.
So everyone wants, and you know this too as a CEO, and many CEOs have to deal with this, everyone wants a silver bullet for figuring that out, right? And I always say silver bullets are for killing werewolves, and werewolves are fake. So there are no silver bullets out there. So what's the answer? The answer is a lot of hard work deployed every day. And in economic development, it is not dissimilar to any other business development strategy. Our product is a little bit more complex, Connecticut, but the approach and strategy is not dissimilar. We do prospecting. We do cold calling. We're reading news all the time. We're going to trade shows. We're making connections. We're building networks. We're trying to identify companies that maybe would be a good fit for us, but have never thought about us. Going back to my philanthropy days, convincing you of an idea that you haven't had yet, making you feel great about it. Putting that idea in people's heads and putting some assets in front of them that might, make their business more successful.
So do you have like a target profile? I mean, I guess I would take a step back and say, John, there's like a challenge of saying, a challenge and opportunity. Take a step back and say, well, Connecticut only has 3.5 million people and only has X number of businesses doing what we want. And the world has billions more people and millions, billions more businesses that could be here. So the good news is big TAM to go after. Bad news is we can't go after all of it. How do you sort of take that giant bubble of opportunity and figure out where to deploy resources?
It's an ongoing challenge and will always be a challenge for us. But I think the thing that we do and we drill down into, I told you about our verticals, but we're drilling deep into those and trying to find areas where we're really, really, really specific. So I'll give you an example. Here's a funny little manufacturing example that I love, which is architectural glass, right? Curtain walls on buildings. Okay. That's interesting business, not something that anyone thinks about very often, right? But the outside of every building that is over a couple of stories high has custom architectural glass on the outside of it that's sheathing the building, and it's designed by an architect, and it's supposed to be lovely and eye-catching and all those wonderful things that make people want to rent space in that building, I suppose. So it turns out that there is a concentration of these companies, and many of them are in Europe and many of them are in Italy because they've been making glass there for the last 700 years or however long. And 700 years ago they were making glassware for the Doge, and today they're making curtain walls for buildings. Well, what are the aspects of a curtain wall? Okay, it is a precision product. It is a custom product. And it needs to have a 0% failure rate, because when the side of a building drops off, it's not good. It's not good.
Yeah. They don't like that.
No. It's generally frowned upon and generally makes front page news. So a custom product, highly precise. What does that sound like? It sounds like an aerospace component. That's what we're really, really good at here in Connecticut, right? And so we found there was a company here in Connecticut that that discovered this themselves. We talked to them and we were like, we're going to put together a little campaign and start talking to folks about this. And sure enough, I think we're up to 4 or 5 different architectural glass companies. The last one that we recruited has a $300 million backlog, signed contract backlog in the U.S. And didn't have a production facility in the U.S. And they're building one in Bloomfield right now. And so, that's a great success story, but it's about really drilling down into those niche areas and finding a place where we can be competitive. And as I like to say to my team, if we're fishing where there are no boats and the water's boiling, it's probably going to be a pretty good day.
Yeah, there you go. So that's really interesting. I think 2 things that were kind of interesting there. One is you took something that was not related to what I think a lot of people think of as, advanced manufacturing in Connecticut, but you said, hey, we look at a product that needs to be highly precise, is high value, and cannot fail, and said, well, that actually connects back. That's an interesting kind of connection I don't think people would have thought you guys would make.
Yeah, and I think that the more that we make those types of connections, right, and this gets back to improv, sit in a room and ideate and add to people's ideas, right? What are other things that are like that? Key, especially as we get into more advanced technology, taking Connecticut's healthcare advantage plus its advanced manufacturing advantage. Well, that's medical device manufacturing is a really, really interesting place for us, right? With life sciences, I think the statistic is something along the lines of, in life sciences, 80% of the marketplace is dominated by about 10 companies. And we know what those companies are, by the way. Several of them are in Connecticut. Pfizer's largest research and development facility in the world is in Connecticut, and there's a reason for that. When you look at medical devices, the top 10 companies own about 20% of the market. So we have to look and use the data, again, our research team, secret weapon, use the data to sort of figure out, well, what's going on in the world and how do we think about those things? And then we come up with a piece of research. I'll share a piece of research with you, which is the Swiss recently passed some legislation. I'm sure you follow this very closely.
Very closely.
Very, very closely.
So my daily morning feed,
this will come
Swiss legislation.
It will come as no surprise to you. Do you read it in German or French?
German, typically.
Yeah. Sehr gut. And so they passed a piece of legislation, and there are medical devices that have been aimed at EU approval. They're going to switch over the course of the next 2 years to being FDA compliant, right? Because the EU rules they found were becoming too complicated for their manufacturers, and there was lots of changes going on. They found that the FDA rules were better for them. What does this mean? It means that every medical device that's produced in Switzerland, which is an economy that actually looks a whole lot like Connecticut, highly precise, high value, highly educated, et cetera. It means that every medical device that is produced in Switzerland is going to be ready for U.S. market entry. They're going to be on the precipice of FDA approval. So we're going to go fish in those waters and really hope that none of my competitors in other places are consuming this podcast.
And the idea being, hey, we've identified an opportunity. They may want to put a flag in the U.S., and if they're going to do it, come to a place that looks a whole lot like where you're coming from.
Come to a place that looks like where you're coming from. And one of the ways that we attract folks to come into Connecticut is market access. Obviously, we're in the orbit of New York and Boston, but also Philadelphia, Washington, Montreal, Toronto. Those are all 6 hours away from us. And in each one of those places, you can burn through all the capital that you just raised in no time at all with rent and with talent and all those sort of things. Connecticut, we can make your money go further, and you do not have to give up the market access. So that's one of our arguments, and it's working.
Yeah, no doubt. Actually, it was funny. You had shared with me kind of your. It's not really a pitch deck. I wouldn't say it was sort of a. I don't even know what you call it, but it's an info sheet. Little info booklet about sort of Connecticut manufacturing and what people might like. And I was really interested to read in there or see in there how relatively inexpensive from a rent standpoint industrial spaces in Connecticut. Did that surprise you when you saw it?
Yeah, I think from we call those our sector snapshots, by the way, and they are available on our website. I would be remiss if I did not mention that. They are publicly available.
ABC, John, always be closing. I love it.
You better believe it. And those sector snapshots, put together a lot of good data, and I think are very interesting. To your point, industrial real estate, kind of like workforce, is an international issue right now. Right? There are not as many people, and there's not as much square footage as people want. But the good news about Connecticut is Connecticut is a legacy manufacturer. I mean, come on, we kind of basically invented manufacturing. Let's just call it. Let's claim it, right? I'm originally from Georgia. In Georgia, we brag about things that we haven't even done yet. In Connecticut, we have trouble bragging about things that we did 100 years ago.
Fair point.
Right. Henry Ford came to Connecticut to look at tool manufacturing in Hartford to get ideas on how to build an assembly line in Detroit.
Sure.
That's our legacy. Innovation is our birthright. Manufacturing is our birthright. Let's embrace it. So what it means is we do have a lot of good industrial real estate. Some of it's a little bit older and needs to be tuned up. But guess what? In a competitive market space, companies are willing to make that investment. From a cost standpoint, and Connecticut gets a bad rap sometimes for being high cost. And what I encourage all of our companies to do that are here and the companies that are looking to come here is to make sure that you drill down deep into what the costs are, because Connecticut's costs, they tend to be more upfront. We tend to be more transparent about it, actually, versus in some other places where the taxes are lower, but you pay a lot of fees. Are those taxes? No, they're not. They're fees. Those are different. You pay for things like services, right? So I give this example over and over again, which is, I live in Hartford. I pay my taxes. My garbage gets picked up. My mom lives in suburban Atlanta. She pays her taxes. She pays someone $150 a month to pick up her garbage. That's a fee. That's a service. She gets a service. She can choose to pay someone $145 or $155 for that service. That's $1,400 a year that she's not being taxed, but it's $1,400 a year.
It's $1,400 is $1,400.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, fair enough. What are some of the other things you think about when people look at where to expand their business or locate their business? What do you think are the real driving factors? I mean, how much is taxes? How much is rent? How much is electricity? How much is access to transportation? How much is workforce? How much is whatever, you must think about that. And what is your view on that?
Yeah, we think about it a lot. I mean, I would say our sales approach, such as it is a consultative approach, Most good sales processes are consultative approaches. So it's incumbent on us to learn what is most important to the company and to work on that. I will say out of the gate, the number one thing that people want to talk about is workforce. And that's because it's an international issue. Post-COVID, people leaving the workforce participation, retirements, and then that's compounded by the fact that generationally and demographically, there are more people leaving the workforce than entering the workforce. That's just math.
That's just math.
That's just math. And, as much as we like to argue with math always wins. Mm-hmm. And so as we're talking about this with folks, we try to be really straightforward with people. And look, if you need a specific thing at a specific price point and we can't satisfy it, we tell you. And we tell them you should move on. You shouldn't look at Connecticut because we're not going to, all of a sudden create some asset that or underwrite some piece of real estate for you in order to land you here. And there's been a lot done around this over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, especially in other parts of the country, but even in Connecticut up until the current administration of, I'm going to write you a check to come and land your business here. Connecticut doesn't do that anymore. And quietly, behind the scenes, CEOs and CFOs like it. Why? Because it's not good for their business. It's a sugar high, right? Would I like a check for $5 million to plant my business? Sure. Did it help my quarter? Maybe. If $5 million helped my quarter, that quarter was kind of in trouble. What's going to happen in Q3?
Right.
There's not going to be another $5 million check, right? So back to your question, do we think about those? Yes, we think about them across the board, but we're doing it in a consultative way with our prospects and with our companies that are here. Our prospects are Connecticut companies too, the ones that are here 60% of our time, and the ones coming from out of state. And a lot of people just don't have all the information that they need. We're a nonprofit. Our outcome is a mission, and our mission is economic growth for the state of Connecticut. So our only interest is in helping these companies succeed. We don't get paid on number of deals closed or anything like that, and that's where the classic business development breaks down right there. But from our standpoint, we're just looking to help people be successful. So if an electricity cost is important to you and it's got to be this thing in order for it to work in your spreadsheet, and it doesn't work for that in Connecticut, we tell you. If we can come up with a different solution for you, we work on that, and we bring in partners to help with that all along the way.
So what's the connection between sort of sales, business development, and sort of delivery and sort of that feedback loop, right? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be the execution of a lot of people that have nothing to do with AdvanceCT that will end up sort of being the decisions that companies expand, stay, don't, what have you, and possibly a reverse feedback loop, right? Like to your point, can't be everything to everybody. And so at some point you've got to understand where are things going so that we're putting people in a position that they'll be successful long-term, not near-term. So what does that feedback loop look like?
So, when we're in sort of the business development loop, we're bringing as many people as we possibly can to the table, as many of the stakeholders. And this is a Connecticut competitive advantage. We can bring leaders from a utility. We can bring leaders from a university. We've had experience of bringing life sciences companies in and bringing the people that are doing research that they're interested in to the table and having them nerd out together about that for many hours. We go and get a snack because we can't understand what they're talking about, but we know that it's really cool. So we're trying to bring as many players together as possible, and this becomes a Connecticut advantage. Why? Because we all know each other. We're a small, tight-knit state. And for business leaders who in Connecticut who haven't accessed the Connecticut network, I encourage them to do so because it's going to help de-risk your business. And for companies that are coming into Connecticut and looking at it for the first time, what they see is an ecosystem of people that are actually committed to their success. It's very hard to do that in other jurisdictions. It's very hard to get all the people around the table that would have an impact on a choice of planting, right? But if you are a high energy, high water usage beverage company and you need 75,000 square feet of space with a 28-foot clear height in Hartford County, well, I can put 7 or 8 people around a table in a week to have a conversation with you about that. And the conversation is straightforward. We're not coaching these folks. We tell them, come in, tell the truth, be straightforward, and we'll see what happens, right? Because if we can't deliver it, they're not going to be successful. And companies get this vibe, especially the ones that are coming in. And I just sort of encourage companies that are in Connecticut to avail yourself of this vibe. It's available to you. Doing business in some other places, it's a little bit more complicated. There are very few places where, the governor will come in and to a meeting and say, here's my cell phone number. No, really, call. Yeah. And this happened at the Paris Air Show last week where he said, really, call me. And the guy said, we're going to test that. He's like, anytime you want.
Yeah, that is nice. So when you think about how you measure outcomes, right? So, I think people hear nonprofit, both history and whatever, and I'll even challenge you on this, John. Yeah, sure. Like, it's really easy in nonprofits, and we've seen it 100 million times, where the outcomes are sort of fungible. Like, how did we do? Oh, it's great.
We did well.
Yeah, we did. Exactly. We did well. Don't you see people love it?
Yes, like we did well by doing good.
Exactly. But doing well by doing good, doesn't grow the economy by itself, right?
Yeah.
So let me push you on. Yeah, sure. Do you have metrics that can objectively say, is AdvanceCT, I mean, look, you're saying a lot of great stuff. I'm sitting here feeling myself being sold, but let's go put some brass tacks to it. Yeah. How do you measure success?
Yeah. And so in economic development writ large, there are basically two success metrics. Those are jobs created and capital investment, capital expenditure into the state. Now, the funny part about that is that people in the state actually don't make those decisions. If a CEO comes to me and says, I want to create 100 jobs, and I said, let's make it 200, and he says yes, we probably don't want that company. That guy's nuts. Same thing true with CapEx. These folks have plans in place and understand that. So as an outcome, people are very, very interested in that. And over the course of the last 4 years, in manufacturing alone, we've added over 7,000 jobs and about 1.3 billion in CapEx, right? So the time that you've been doing this podcast, AdvanceCT's work, and these are announced. These are publicly available stats. I've got the receipts, if you will. So things that people haven't done or haven't announced, that have done that they have not announced are not on that list, right? And that happens all the time too.
Of course.
People are quiet about it. That doesn't answer your question. Here's what we do. Right, we are laser focused on creating new interest in Connecticut. And so what do our stats look like? Our stats look like your stats for your company and for everyone else's company. It's a business development funnel. How many suspects are we identifying that are within a particular parameter that are good for Connecticut within our sectors and within subsectors?
And that would be the funnel could be filled with existing companies as well as net new companies?
That's correct.
Got it.
Yep. But we think about that balance very, very, very carefully, right? Because one would think, maybe one's easier than the other. They're actually equally challenging in their own unique ways, but it is
a little bit of both, right?
Our current customer is our best customer and is our best future customer. So we need both. We want both, and that's going to actually produce more job creation and more investment. So we think about it as a funnel. Typical business development funnel. What are the conversions? What are the conversion rates from suspect to lead to project, which is what we call a project or an opportunity. And we're very deliberate about it. So to get onto the Team Connecticut pipeline, which we work with AdvanceCT, with other chambers of commerce, with Metro Hartford Alliance, with New Haven, with Stamford, with New London, with economic development people, one-man economic development shops in towns all throughout Connecticut, and with DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development. We work on a pipeline. And our pipeline, in order to get on our project on our pipeline, we have to have a defined project. We have to be talking to the decision maker. We have to know how many jobs and what kind of jobs are being created. We have to have the CapEx number. We have to have the CapEx number approved by whoever is approving the CapEx number. And we have to have a timeline that's real and provable. That's a pretty high bar.
That is a high bar.
Right. And what it does is it helps us weed out adventures, research. People do tons of research. Oh, well, what would happen if we opened a plant in one of these 30 states? Mm-hmm. That's not a project for us yet, right? We want to be talking. We have to be talking to the person who's at the controls. We want to be talking to the pilot. right? We want to know what the flight plan is. We want to know that there are snacks on board. We want to know that they know where they're landing, and we want to know what time they're landing, right?
And that's to get on the project opportunity board. And then from there, it's moved to close.
Yes. Yeah. That gets you on the opportunity board. And at any given time, we have 60, 70, 80 opportunities, live opportunities.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Generally in that 60-40 split?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Just thinking about it's the end of the quarter today. I know this comes out in a couple of weeks, but it's the end of the quarter today. So tomorrow I'd have a better stat for you. Sorry, Ari.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And so when you think about what's sort of a typical sales cycle, in other words, from, and maybe it's hard to say, but from sort of suspect to identified project, and then maybe more importantly, from project hits the board to
close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then by the way, from close to shovel in the ground, I was curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those are the big questions, right? And so the answer is radically different in the last 2 years from what it used to be. So those from suspect to close in economic development, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, pre-COVID, let's call it pre-COVID, 24 months, 36 months. Now, 3 years, 4 years, sometimes even 5 years. Why?
Yeah.
Supply chain, right? I mean, you've got folks, I was talking to people in the commercial real estate. Some people are waiting 50 weeks to get an electrical panel for a building that they're building. It's all done. No electrical panel. No electrical panel. No
tenants.
No tenants. Right. Right. No one's doing advanced manufacturing by candlelight. No. And so there are a lot more. Again, we were talking about the variables and
how to bring back some of those water wheels. But
yeah, exactly. yeah. Water's a good competitive asset here in Connecticut, by the way. We're trying to de-risk those things along the way. So it's taking longer. Right? How long does it take to go from suspect to get on the opportunity board? That's usually about 6 to 12 months. Either it's real or it's not. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes there's push and pull in there. Right? Oh, we're going to wait a quarter. Oh, we had good news. Oh, we had bad news. Oh, we had this switch. Oh, we had that switch. Those sort of things. From on the opportunity board to close, it can take 2 years.
So how do you think about, you mentioned 7,300 new jobs over the last 4 years.
In manufacturing.
Sorry. And are those gross new jobs, net new? Do you think about that net new?
We only count net.
Okay. So it's plus minus.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we look, Connecticut is a advanced, well-educated state. If you go out with a gross number, you know what the next question is going to be. Right?
Fair enough.
And so if you are, if you understand your audience and you understand your state, and you understand our culture, we're a culture of precision. Mm-hmm. We like the right answer. We don't want the good answer. We don't want the do good by doing well answer sort of thing, but we want the right answer. Those are 7,300 net new jobs.
So when you think about 1,800 roughly net new jobs per year over the last 4 years, and you're looking at 400 million of CapEx, maybe 300 million of CapEx, a little bit more, are you saying to yourself, maybe ask it a different way. Do you have a target of what you want to get to? Because I have no idea to know if those numbers are good, bad, or middle of the road.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is we do not put our targets are not around jobs and CapEx because it's hard for us to create that outcome. Our job is to create volume, and volume will drive those forward.
Volume?
A number of new suspects, number of people in the funnel and things like that. And I'll just tell you, a typical sales funnel looks like this. Economic development funnel is very flat, right? The conversion rate from suspect to shovel in the ground, 1% to 2%, mm-hmm. right? So you've got to fill the top of that funnel. And if you're not a good salesperson, you know how to do that. If you are a good salesperson, it's a lot of hard work every day. Mm-hmm. And our business development people are really, I use the metaphor of farming all the time, right? Everyone wants Thanksgiving dinner. No one wants to plant a yam. No one wants to run a turkey farm, right? But if you want Thanksgiving dinner, someone's got to do a lot of hard work every day. Right. And we can all celebrate that. And when, a company like ASML down in Wilton last year announces a huge expansion, Blueprint Robotics up in Windsor just made an announcement. This is a really, really cool custom house building company. Mm. They're going to put $100 million in the ground, hire hundreds and hundreds of people, a 450,000 square foot facility. the idea of trying to drive a something from a CapEx standpoint to make those guys invest more, like we're just going to plant them in the ground and help them do really well, right?
So,
and
but
make
how
it
do we
work.
know, just taking a step back, how do we know if we're doing well?
Yep.
If we're just saying volume,
Yep.
You could do 100 deals, could be 100 very, very small deals or 100 very, very large deals, different outcomes. Like, don't we need to have some type of a target?
Yeah, I think so. And so I think, as a young company, we're 4 years old too. We've been at this piece of work in essence for 2 years, right? Because COVID interrupted. We were doing our business development work, but we were also seconded to the state to help them do research and help them figure out, how to make sure that Connecticut stayed open, to do the advising around manufacturing is an essential function, essential job that needs to stay open, et cetera. I think as we mature as an organization, that we're going to drill down deeper into those, because look, to your point, we closed 100, we closed 100 whatevers last year, and it was 2-person startups. Does that move the dial? No, it doesn't. But we tend to be pretty transparent about what we're winning, and publish it every year in our annual report so that people can see what we're doing. Are we going after big companies? Yeah, you better believe it, right? ASML, again, down in Wilton, probably one of the most complex manufacturing operations that has ever existed. And that's saying something for Connecticut, which is, swing a rope and you hit a complex manufacturing operation, right? They make the machine that every semiconductor plant needs in order to make a semiconductor. And they are making one of the most significant and vital components of that machine here in Connecticut, right? And so last week, I was in Veldhoven, Netherlands, with the governor, talking to the CEO about that company, about continuing their investment in Connecticut. That's how you do the big hunting, right? The small and medium-sized businesses, which are the bread and butter of any economy, and certainly the bread and butter of Connecticut, which we know, right? Those are through our classic business development operations. But we are working at every single level, whether it's attracting more investment from a company like ASML, talking to RTX at the Paris Air Show, talking to Accenture, companies that have thousands and thousands of employees in Connecticut, and about expanding here and doing that.
Which we definitely need to do. So we'll leave it at that. But I will challenge you for next time we talk.
I'll come back.
That we should look at, I think, saying, hey, we've got our key verticals.
Yep.
AdvanceCT should look to add % or what have you.
Yep.
And then build on that. So I know we're almost out of time here, or maybe even over, but I'm going to keep going because I got a few more questions.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't spend a lot of time talking about workforce, and it would be really irresponsible of me not to bring it up.
Sure.
From the very beginning of this podcast, episode 2 or 3, I never forget Jason Howie from OK Industries coming in and saying his top 3 challenges, by the way, this is pre-COVID and everything, his top 3 challenges were easy to describe: workforce. Yeah. And that has not abated. Look, I run a business in multiple states. You talk to people in multiple states. I think wherever you are, your local media writes it as a local story.
Sure.
It's not a local story. Workforce is a challenge everywhere, but it's a challenge that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And so, I assume people you talk to, workforce is a challenge.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? What is the position of AdvanceCT on workforce, and where do you see that trend going?
So it's the first 3 things that people want to talk to us about too. If no one's going to invest a single dollar if they can't have someone on payroll and on staff to do the work. So it's absolutely vital and linchpin for what we're doing. And as you pointed out, this is an international issue. There's not a single jurisdiction, state, local, country that isn't dealing with this. And so the question for us as a state, as Connecticut, is how are we currently addressing the issue, and what are we doing on a short-term, medium-term, and long-term basis to address this? And we're dealing with some macro trends, demography and things like that, and those are hard. We're dealing with sort of a mismatch between who's available and what their skill sets are. And so I'll just answer this in a couple of different ways. One is that Governor Lamont, I know, and he says this publicly, it's one of his top initiatives to make sure that we're doing this, and we're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into all sorts of different types of workforce training programs, incumbent worker training programs, helping to design programs, reskilling, et cetera. Super, super, super important. I'll tell you, I've worked with some Connecticut companies that don't know how to get in touch with the state university system of Connecticut. So we sometimes do things that are as simple as that. I talked to a company last week who 10 years ago knocked on the door of the community college, which was down the road from his factory. He's advanced manufacturing, aerospace component manufacturer. 10 years ago, they basically said, yeah, we're not interested. And he never went back. And he told me that story last week. And I said, well, there's a new sheriff in town and you're going to get a different answer. And so what do? We immediately linked him up with the leadership at that community college and facilitated a meeting so that he can have a conversation about what he needs. And the point that I want to make about that, and this is again, Connecticut advantage, is in our small size and leveraging our small size, which is the people that are leading our educational institutions are ready to have that conversation. And I can prove that out and have had that proven many times. I was at UConn yesterday with a major manufacturer. And the purpose of the conversation was to talk about research and development that they could do together and workforce development. And it was a substantive, generative conversation between the president of the University of Connecticut, the head of research for the University of Connecticut, and the corporate leader here in Connecticut, and their respective teams. So we're facilitating conversations like that. We're making sure that the simple things that people can do, the connectivity is there. The competitive advantage for Connecticut is that businesses are sitting at the table. They're the ones at the center, and it's not just our big businesses, right? In a big state, right, a bigger state, you're going to have your top 10 employers there, and they're all going to be having, thousands of employees and things like that. But we have a successful track record in Connecticut of our businesses and our business people, our leading organizations are really smart. So they know that if they're going to solve a workforce problem for their company and they don't solve it for their supply chain, well, they just made another problem or they just exacerbated a problem. And so bringing those business leaders together and having government and educational institutions respond, react, and tailor their programs to what the business need is actually different from lots of other places in the United States and lots of other places in the world where at that table sits the Secretary of Labor and the president of that university. And they're like, you know what you need? In Connecticut, we don't do the, you know what you need type of thing. We say, tell me what you need. And that works a lot better.
Well, do we have measurable outcomes? That's all great and prospective, but are we seeing the fruits of any of that labor? Like when you look back and say, are we graduating more STEM people? Do we have more people coming out with advanced manufacturing certificates or degrees? Like what are the outcome-based metrics to say, okay, this is actually working?
Yeah. And so the answer to that is yes, there are outcome-based metrics and it's early days. It's early days because this is all post-COVID activity in lots of ways because of the huge investments that are coming from the federal government. And this, our administration is using those to supercharge workforce training and workforce development. So I would say it's early days. There is data, which I wish I could come out with at the top of my head, but that's why I've got a phenomenal research team and the sector snapshots, which you can see on our website at advancect.org. Always be closing.
Always be closing.
And so that we demonstrate, we are producing more STEM graduates. We are thinking about this more holistically. We do have things like, our K through 12 system, which has magnet schools not only at the high school level, but at the middle school level, which are creating STEM-enabled, STEM-interested people. And going back to my time at the Science Center, we know this. There's peer-reviewed data on this. You may be able to change a chemistry guy into a computer science guy, or you may be able to change a biology gal into an engineering gal at the high school level, but you're not going to change a poet into an engineer.
No.
You can do that in 5th grade because it becomes a both and instead of an either or. Right. And we're doing that in Connecticut. And so we're thinking about those things a little bit more holistically than other folks are. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, Ari, because I feel very well driven towards, I'm going to have a PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, numbers up the wazoo.
I'm going to have numbers up the wazoo. We'll have to, do you know a technology company that could enable us to have stats on the screen during a podcast?
I do. We'll talk about that offline.
Excellent.
So as we go to wrap up, John, I just want to ask a kind of a question about the future. So, you're newly appointed to the role of CEO.
Yeah.
You'll be taking over in the fall here. Do you envision a change in direction for AdvanceCT over what we've seen in the last 4 years?
No, I really don't. I think we're going to continue to double down. As I said, we're a relatively new organization, right? So 4 years in, it's probably time to take stock and to do a little bit of what my current CEO, Peter Denius, who I absolutely think is phenomenal, would call navel gazing. Mm-hmm. Do a little bit of navel gazing, but I think the answer is we're going to continue to double down on the work that we're doing about business retention and expansion and business attraction. I would not expect that we're going to see a change in how we're approaching this. We've got a phenomenal partner in the governor. We have a phenomenal partner in Commissioner Alexander Dom at DECD. We have phenomenal partners in the mayors, in our state reps, in our state senators, and in our federal delegation as well.
You like the team?
The team, I mean, if
it ain't broke,
don't fix it.
Fair enough.
We're on our way.
Well, I like that. Well, listen, we do need to kind of get those metrics. And I think, the key to achieving a goal is to set a goal. So we'll look forward to pushing you on that one.
I look forward to being pushed and look forward to sharing my annual report, which will be heavily influenced by this conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, listen, I just want to ask you a couple of kind of round out questions, and then we'll send you on your way. I know it's been a busy day for you. So just the first question I want to ask you is, if you had to do something other than be the CEO of AdvanceCT, and it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you do?
I would probably improvise every night.
Yeah. Back to the improv?
Yeah, I love it.
Fair enough.
It's a lot of fun.
When you take time off, John, you a staycation guy or exotic destination?
Every other.
Every other.
Sometimes it's a staycation, and then the next time it's exotic. Staycation, exotic.
Got to keep it real.
Yeah.
Change it up. I like that. Yeah. Do you have a favorite business book?
7 Habits.
Stephen Covey fan.
Yes, I am.
Fair enough.
It's not just a business book.
Yes,
it's a little bit more life philosophy book, but works in both realms.
Yeah, as most business books do.
Indeed.
John, what's something that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Wow. That's a great question. Boy, there are a lot of answers, and I guess I'm going to go back to my dad. I lost my dad a couple of years ago. My dad was the CEO of a $1 billion construction materials company. And one of the things I learned from him was we would get in the car and we would go out to a rock crushing plant. And he would drive his Chevy Caprice Classic right into the pit and get out. We'd put on hard hats and he'd start talking to people. He would just start talking to people. And I think what I learned from him was know what's going on in your business at every single level and understand that everyone has something valuable to tell you about what's going on in your business, and you need to listen to everybody.
Yeah, that's a good one. What's something, John, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young John, and if he'd listened to you, it would have a real positive impact on his life?
Start economic development earlier. I love it.
Do you?
I really do. I do. I'm originally from Georgia. Connecticut's my adopted home state. I love it here, and I love talking about Connecticut, obviously, but I really enjoy the work. I really, really enjoy the work.
Wow, look at that. Apparently walking your dog and asking for some help really can bring you in.
You never know.
You do never know. John, thank you really so much for coming on today and sharing what's going on at AdvanceCT. I really appreciate you being here for the start of year 5 and for everything that you guys are doing. I think it's a really interesting approach, and I think it really takes sort of the classic sales approach and puts it to interesting use, and it's really fascinating, and I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thanks, Ari, and congratulations to you, and thanks for highlighting so many amazing things that are going on in Connecticut. We appreciate it.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.